So you bought the FuelX to improve the running of your bike, but how do you install it? It doesn't matter whether you bought the Lite or the Pro. The installation is really quite simple and only needs a simple tools. So let's see how it works. This is the FuelX Pro. The Lite is exactly the same for installation, except the Pro has an extra cable. You have the FuelX module itself with a cable coming out. On the Pro there are two cables here. On the Lite there's just the one. This is the one cable that you will also get with the Lite, and it connects into here. It only goes one way round, so that will be very easy when you come to plug this in. This is the connector into the lambda sensor. Before you start playing with the bike, it's worthwhile having a look at this connector and getting used to how it worked. This is exactly the same connector that you will find on the bike, and all you do, let's put it together, there's a sliding lock that holds it together. It will only go one way round, so you can't get it wrong. It just sits in there and you lock it, and that's it. This is how it looks on the bike. The lower cable, I'm not sure which way round it goes, but the lower cable runs off to the lambda sensor, which plugs in to the exhaust, and the upper cable runs off into the wiring harness where it connects to the ECU. All we are doing on the bike is we'll be pulling this out, pulling this apart, and then inserting this between the two. So that will go into the locking connector on the bike and we'll lock it down. This one will take the cable from the bike, insert it, lock it in, and then when we connect this, the FuelX module then takes the reading coming from the lambda sensor, does its magic, and then sends a reading through to the stock ECU, and that alters the fuel mix that the stock ECU will send, because the stock ECU has, shall we say, a fuel map that is compromised to meet emission standards. So this will eliminate that by sitting in the middle of the signal from the lambda sensor to the stock ECU, and that's why we call this a piggyback, because it piggybacks onto the stock ECU. It does not replace the stock ECU. So now that we know how this works, that goes in there, that locks it in, you pull the cable, it disconnects. That's all the installation pretty much for the Lite, except for putting it on the bike. Now the Pro comes with a second cable, a much longer cable, and this is the handlebar switch. This changes the AFR settings that you want to use. So if you want a richer fuel setting, you go for a higher map, and then if you decide that's too much, you can click down to a leaner setting. So the installation of the product is quite simple. The piggyback unit will sit under the passenger seat. The lambda sensor connector will run down here and connect under here. And if you've got the Pro, the handlebar switch will run under the tank and fit on the handlebars. Now you will have to experiment to find where this best fits to the stock handlebars. I don't have stock handlebars. I have the Magura bagoros handlebars, which I believe might be coming back into production. You'll need to decide where that's going to sit and how you're going to route it. Typically with this cable, you want to try and bring it back along the handlebars and come down really central with it, because your handlebars turn, and every time those handlebars turn, it will drag the cable with it. Installation is simple enough. Remove the seats. This can sit down here. What you need to do is to get this through to here. You can run across here if you're careful. The seat doesn't go any further down than this. It does seem like it squishes it a little bit, but I've certainly had no issues. There are a couple of gaps where you can get it through. There is a gap here where you can feed it through to the relays. There is a gap under here, but that can mean taking this cross piece off, which is quite painful. You've got to take the side pods off, and then you can take this bolt out, and then this comes off. But when you try and put it back on, very often it doesn't want to fit, and it involves some levering around to get it back in place, and then you've got to put the side pods back on. The lambda sensor sits behind the coil cover here, so we will take that off. But you first need to decide how you are going to run this down here. Where it will come is across the top of here, and again, you don't want these wires getting pinched by the seat. You can either run it under this side panel, but in my experience, these side panels are a bit of a pain to take off. There are 3 bolts on the front, there's a bolt in the top, and there are 2 bolts at the back. You need to remove them all. Once you've removed these bolts, and don't lose the washers that sit behind them, you'll then need to lift these tabs off the tank. With those freed off, you can then slide this forwards and off. But they can be a real pain to put back on, because there's a lot of places that they clip in, and you've got to get all of those places lined up when you put them back, and that can take a few attempts. The other alternative is just to lift the tank up a little bit and feed the cables through. And that's what I'm going to do for this installation. My one reservation is that it means taking this center plastic off here, the one that sits around the ignition. Your bike may be different, but on mine, this is really hard to get off. It just clips in place, and you need to get your fingers under the bottom and then slide it up. But mine is so tightly on there, it really doesn't want to do it. And what I've discovered is the easiest way is to get a flat blade screwdriver just under here while you're trying to pull it up. Just gently, very gently lever it, because you do not want to damage the ignition, or more importantly this plastic. And I say more importantly because it's quite expensive. And then getting some pressure with your fingers underneath, you can just clip that. Do the same on the other side. And then this cover will remove. And so it just holds through these 2 grommets here, and it is really painful to get off by hand, I find. With that cover removed, there are 2 bolts that hold the tank down, and they sit either side of the ignition switch. They're 12mm, so be very careful when you are undoing these, because it is very easy to smack this into the tank. Don't ask how I know. Especially if it's been done up tight and you get that initial, it will smack and it will go straight in the tank. You could leave these still in, just undo them a bit. We can remove the bolt at the back. Remove it and the washer, and then we can lift the back of the tank up. Now the tank won't move very much, because it's still held quite firmly in place by everything else that's around it, but you will have enough room to squeeze the cables through. We need to get this down here. Like so. This gives us the initial placing of the cable. We need to remove the coil cover, so we just take out these two screws, which are 5. On the back of this screw there is an earth wire for the coil, so make sure you note where it is, because if you don't put it back on, the bike won't start. Probably. And this here is the coil wire, is the earth wire for the coil. Now we can then move the coil out the way. Up in here we will find the connector that we recognize, so we need to unlock that. They will come apart. We can take our new connectors and we can work them down into here. So they will only go one way round. So clipped in, tuck them back up, put our coil in place, put our wire in the right place, take a bolt, the earth wire onto it, line it up so you've got a few threads in it. Snug these down. Bear in mind this is earth wire for your coil, so it wants to be nice and snug. Clean off any rust that might have been on that connector, and generally clean it up is always a good idea when you do that, just to give it a fresh connection. And that is it. You might want to use a zip tie just to keep the cables in place if you want to. Then we just need to sit the tank back down and we're pretty much done. So we want to route this cable somewhere where it's not going to get squashed by the tank. We can drop our tank back in place, making sure any other cables you've got are also not being trapped. Sit the tank back in place. Decide where you want to run that wire. There is enough room along here to run an extra wire. This will go across to here. This, as I say, will only go on one direction. Ideally you run it under this, but if you're careful you'll probably be okay if you keep it flat and maybe zip tie it in place, but my recommendation is to tuck it under. Just wiggle your way past the relays. Now if you're running the Lite, that's it for the installation. All you need to do now is to bolt the tank back down and put the seats back on, turn the bike on, and that's it, job's done. Since we're doing the Pro, there's another extra step we need to make. To install the Pro, you need to mount the handlebar switch. If it doesn't fit, you'll have to find somewhere to put it, and if necessary, you can zip tie it into place. Fitting is very easy. I'm going to mount mine up here. It's easy enough for me to just move my hand and flip the switches, so that's not a big deal. So I will take the clamp and bolt it into place. It should fit in with these sort of dovetail joints. If you get it lined up, it slots straight in. So just take a moment to get that nicely lined up, pushed into place. And that's where mine's going. And then you can put the bolts in. I think this is a 2.5mm Allen. One from the front, one from the back. Before you tighten it down, just get that mounting exactly how you want it. So that's a nice secure mounting for that. I'm not going to overdo that because you're screwing into this plastic. Decide on your cable routing. It comes with some zip ties so that you can place it where you want it. Now I will be going just under here, and I'm only going to zip tie that in place once I've actually got it routed. I'm going to go close to the center here, and I'm going to leave myself some slack to allow for the handlebar pulling it backwards and forwards as you turn. Before you tighten everything down, just make sure when you turn the handlebars lock from lock that this cable doesn't fail. What I ended up doing was to route it down this side of the bike, because on this side you've got the coil and coil cover. It's quite limited space, but on this side of the bike you can actually just put your hand straight in through this gap here and move things around. And if you lift the tank around, then you can wiggle it to where you want it quite easily. And once you've got everything in place, then you can put your zip ties on and make a nice neat installation. So I've now got this coming up this side of the tank, and make sure you've got it such that when you put the tank back down in place, that this cable isn't going to be pinched, and it's also not going to be pinched by the seat as the seat slides across the top here. And then with the unit unplugged, I'm just going to point out that here you can see there are 3 LEDs. These LEDs tell you whether you've got it plugged in and also which setting you've got it on. I've got nothing tied down yet, so we've got 2 connectors on the piggyback unit, and we've got 2 connectors coming in. They only fit on a particular connector, they don't fit on the other one, so you can't get it wrong, and they only fit one way round. So again, you can't get it wrong when you actually connect them. So it's a nice waterproof connector. We have a look, there's a clippy bit here on the top, and we've got a locking tab there, so that just goes in and clicks together. If you want to remove it, just lift the locking tab and wiggle it back out. And the same on the other. You just feel for that sharp tab sticking out, and it goes into there. And there we are. That's all it takes to connect this. As you can see, there's quite a lot of cable here, so you probably will want to pull some of this back and keep it somewhere safe under the tank, but also somewhere you can keep these connectors. And don't forget, if you run it through here carefully, then you'll have a bit of space above the battery that they can just snug down into. What happens when I turn the key on? Okay, so you can see that the units do a self-test, and if we watch the unit here, you'll see that it will also flash. So this as stock comes set to setting 3. To move it up, you just click here, and then see it flashes for the number for the setting you've got it on. So if I move that back down, so that was setting 1, setting 2, and the light comes on after to confirm, setting 3. And the same lights are visible on the unit itself. So if I go down 1, So that's setting 2, and then green to confirm. Go down one more, setting 1. So you can always check where you are on the settings. And that's it. The FuelX Pro is now installed. Slightly longer install than for the FuelX Lite, but really it's only a matter of minutes. No specialist tools, no specialist knowledge needed to do this, just the basics to remove, to lift the tank, or to remove the fuel panel, which is just a couple of screws. So really, really easy. Find somewhere to put the fuel controller for the Pro, and you're ready to ride. I'm going to take a few minutes to just tidy these up, bolt the tank back down, and put the seat and cover back on. And that's it, job done. That's all it takes to install the FuelX on the KTM Duke 390. Other bikes will be very, very similar. For some ideas about whether you should buy the Lite or the Pro, and some commentary about maybe why you do or don't want to use the Pro, there will be a separate video which will be linked here. So thanks for watching, and I will see you again soon.